Shana Tova. Shana Tova. Thank you. That was good. That was good. Yeah. This moment is always a special one for me. Standing here, looking out on a full room, seeing so many faces who have not been together in some time is a tremendous privilege. Knowing that so many of us come back year after year, and that we're joined by so many new faces and families to take part in these holidays, to offer words of prayer and reflection, to sit together and sing together, and ultimately, hopefully, to be inspired for the year ahead. This is a moment and opportunity I do not take lightly. I know it's not quite the same as the great moments in rhetorical history, but that's still what I picture when we assemble here each year. I've always been someone who's interested in rhetoric. It seems appropriate for a rabbi. And some of my favorite classes in college and then in rabbinical school were about speech writing and analysis, learning history through the great speeches and sermons of each era. Whenever there's a study of those great moments, particularly of the 20th and 21st centuries, one moment is just about always placed at the top of the list. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. We just marked the 60th anniversary of this speech, originally delivered on August 28th, 1963, as part of the March on Washington. On that anniversary, I decided to reread the text and encourage you to do so as well when you have the opportunity. There's so much that stands out about this speech from a historical perspective, but to me personally, there are a few things that I always appreciate. The speech represents a hopeful and optimistic vision of the future. It does not shy away from describing the challenges of that moment in history, but it ultimately dreams of a better future where all people are free and equal. And I love that Dr. King, a minister by profession, relied on sacred texts in describing his vision and his dream. He looked to the words of the Bible that we share to describe his vision for a better world, quoting the prophet Isaiah, "And every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together." That's in the Haftarah we read on Shabbat Nachamu, the Shabbat of comfort that comes up over the summer. And he famously includes the words of the prophet Amos as well, "Vayigal kamayim mishpat, utstaka kenachal etan." We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Knowing that the words of the Tanakh, the words of our prophets, have inspired people of so many different backgrounds for so many generations fills me with a great sense of pride as a rabbi, just as I think it should for all of us. As much as I love this speech, though, it's possible that this was not the most important of Dr. King's life. That one took place a few years earlier. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to change seats on a Montgomery, Alabama public bus. On December 5th, she was found guilty and fined $10. In response to this so-called crime, a new organization was founded, the Montgomery Improvement Association. And at a meeting later that same night, the Montgomery bus boycott was launched. This Montgomery Improvement Association was founded by ministers and community leaders who decided that King should be the one to lead their efforts. That evening, at the Holt Street Baptist Church, King addressed a crowd that spilled out onto the streets. In a speech he prepared in only about 20 minutes, he reminded the people what was at stake, saying, "We are not wrong. We are not wrong in what we are doing. If we are wrong, justice is a lie. Love has no meaning, and we are determined here in Montgomery to work and fight until Justice runs down like water, and righteousness like a mighty stream. That speech was an uplifting success, launching the boycott and inspiring a movement that would ultimately change the course of history. As it's described in a new biography of King, written by Jonathan Eig and published this past spring, King would call December 5th, 1955, the Day of Days. It was the day at the age of 26 that King found his voice, preaching a mixture of political agitation and gospel, making the radical seem reasonable, perhaps inevitable. The world would change. All men would be free. Their time had come. Part of what made that moment so impactful is that King did not seek it out. The other community leaders wanted him at the front and encouraged him to serve. In the few minutes that King had at home before delivering the defining speech, he said to his wife, Coretta, that he felt he had no choice but to accept his leadership position. "You know that whatever you do," Coretta said, "you have my backing." His mother, too, didn't want him to lead, saying, "I told him I felt because he was young, they might not accept him, and because he was new in the city, they might not listen." But her concerns passed. Step by step, the movement gained power, and her son became, as she put it, so greatly involved. What ultimately led him to take on that role, that mantle of leadership? King would later describe the internal conflicts he felt, and in his struggle, that he prayed out loud, saying, "Lord, I am down here trying to do what's right, but Lord, I confess that I'm weak now, and I can't let the people see me like this." An inner voice replied, "Martin Luther, stand up for righteousness, and lo, I will be with you until the end of the world." King's answer became clear. It's a moment that some would define as his calling. Here he was, standing ready for whatever was to happen. Inspired by the situation around him, King knew that he had to step up. He was ready to answer this call, saying, "Here I am." We don't often talk about callings in Jewish circles. It's a much more common discussion and language used by our partners, by Christian ministers. The idea that they hear an internal voice calling them to serve God in the community. But even though our language and perspective is a little different, we have a version of the same idea too. We don't phrase it the same way about hearing a call. We tend to think more about answering it, saying that we are here and we are ready to take on a new role, to help shape ourselves and our communities, saying, Hineni. That word seems simple. Hineni, hine ani, here I am. But it's so much more than that. The word only appears a handful of times in the Torah, but each one represents something special. When God calls out to Moses from the burning bush, he says, "Moshe, Moshe," and Moses answers, "Hineni." When Jacob is hesitant to go with his family and live under Joseph's protection in Egypt, God calls out to him in a vision, saying, "Yaakov, Yaakov," and Jacob answers, "Hineni." When the prophet Samuel, whose birth we just read about in the Haftarah, when he was first called into God's service, he too answers, "Hineni." In the first prophetic vision of Isaiah, he describes hearing God ask, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And Isaiah said, "Here I am, Hineni, send me." And perhaps most memorably, in the text of Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, which we'll read tomorrow, God begins the test of Abraham, calling out to him, "Avraham, Avraham," and he answers, "Hineni." And then again at the end, with Abraham holding the knife in his hand, God calls out to stop him, "Avraham, Avraham," and he answers once more, "Hineni." All of these moments paint a picture that Hineni is more than just a simple acknowledgement. It's more than just checking our names off the attendance list. It's a statement that we stand ready, willing, and able to begin a new task, to take on a new role, and to head down a path unto which we're called. Rabbi Nina Beth Cardin, writing for the 929 Project, an initiative to read all 929 chapters of the Bible, she explains that Hineni is a pure, astonished, unguarded affirmation given before all the facts are known. It's a spontaneous, unequivocal commitment promising, I am here, where and as you found me, fully attentive, focused, all in. It is brave and humble. What adds to these Hineni moments is that in each of them, the leaders did not seek them out. In fact, most of them tried to avoid it. Moses famously listed several reasons why God should pick someone else to lead the people. Who am I that I should go before Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? What if the people do not believe me and do not listen to me? Please, O Lord, I have never been a man of words. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Make someone else your agent. The great biblical commentator Rosh understands Hineni to be an expression of readiness, but also humility. None of our biblical leaders sought power. Many of them initially seemed hesitant to take on their roles, not because they weren't capable, but because they were humble. Of all our leaders, these are the ones we tend to admire most. The ones who don't seek out these positions, the ones who aren't in it for their own glory. Rather, the ones who lead out of a sense of obligation. The leaders who believe in their vision and their dream. The leaders who, when they find themselves in difficult positions, ones they didn't ask for and may not have been ready for, they nonetheless still answer, Hineni. Speaking personally, there have been several moments over the past years when I too felt thrown into something I did not ask for, nor was I prepared for. When 11 people were killed at the Tree of Life Synagogue nearly 5 years ago, we all placed a renewed focus on synagogue security. With rising trends of anti-Semitism in this country and around the world, rabbis have had to become security experts and learn a great deal about crisis and disaster management. I now stand here with one hand on my machzor and one on a panic button, wondering if I'll ever have to push it. I did not ask for this new obligation, but it's one I needed to step into. Likewise, when COVID struck 3.5 years ago, I had no idea how to prepare or what would happen. I spent lots of time learning new technologies, new public health policies and terminologies, all without so many of the social connections that are always needed. Add to that a sometimes divisive and tense political atmosphere that could make every decision scrutinized from all angles and nearly impossible to meet everyone's needs. Here too, I certainly did not seek out this challenge and admittedly did feel overwhelmed and overburdened at several moments. Yet it was a challenge I needed to overcome. These challenges, along with several others, have led many rabbis, ministers, and other clergy to leave their positions behind. Is what was already a demanding life and line of work really worth it with all of these new obstacles and obligations? But while these moments have been difficult and emotionally draining, they are also moments to emphatically answer, Hineni, here I am. In spite of all these challenges, there are so many moments that make it all worth it, that make this role and this opportunity such a blessing. Standing here on a Shabbat morning when a B'nai Mitzvah student holds the Torah and looks out onto the congregation, everyone looks up at the student here, but I get to look right there at the student's parents, tears of pride beginning to well in their eyes as their child proudly reaches this special moment. Standing under the chuppah at a wedding, when the whole room rises to greet the bride, I get to look out on her face as she sees her groom waiting for her. Celebrating with a student who has just completed the process of conversion, putting upwards of a year's worth of learning and reflection into choosing our tradition and making the active choice to become part of our people. Watching my daughter play with Lina Kostraba, the 3-year-old girl whose family our community helped find a home here after fleeing Ukraine. Being present as a family comes together to share memories of a loved one who has just passed away, embracing their raw emotions as they reflect on the life of a family member who shared so many blessings with them. Even just standing here right now, I know you think that you do, but I have the best seats in the house. Looking out on this room, seeing all of you, hearing all of you, knowing that something brings you back here each week and each year to learn together, to hear words of Torah, and to mark all of these major moments in our lives. All of that is what helps me persevere through the many challenges and ultimately say, Hineni, here I am. As a congregation, we have many of these moments too. Opportunities to answer new challenges that we may not have expected, but ones that we're prepared to answer. Families aren't connecting with synagogues and attending the same events like they used to. Hineni, we're here and ready to figure it out. People don't support religious institutions the same way they used to. Hineni, it's not the same service and melodies I grew up with. Hineni. All of these are challenges and opportunities we may not have sought out, but they are all ones that we're ready to answer. Hineni, here we are. In a few moments, we'll begin Musaf, the service that contains many of the core prayers of our High Holiday Liturgy. And after our private and personal prayers, before we begin the repetition of the Amidah, Cantor Greenberg will chant his own personal prayer, asking for the strength to pray on our behalf. That prayer begins with the word Hineni. Before we can ask who shall live and who shall die, we must first proclaim that we are ready, that our prayers are ready. Hineni. The moments in life and in history that tend to matter most are the ones just like this, when there's a change in the air, and we may be a little hesitant at first, but ultimately something pulls us in the right direction, and we're able to answer, Hineni. 60 years ago, as Dr. King looked out on 250,000 people assembled on the National Mall, he began the speech that he had prepared for that day. About 10 minutes into his speech, it was going well, but not as well as another speech he gave earlier that same summer. But then something happened, a moment that he did not plan, one that he may not have been expecting, but one he was ready for. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair, he said. But then he looked up, he left his prepared remarks behind, and he continued, and so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. He continued from there, describing his dream in one of the most famous speeches in American history. 3 months later, he told an interviewer he didn't know why he turned aside from his prepared speech. Some credit the singer, Malia Jackson, who was standing on the stage and shouted out, "Tell him about the dream." We will never know for sure what inspired King in that moment. Perhaps it was another of these moments when he felt called, when he felt the prophetic voice rising inside of him. But whatever it was that spoke to him, however he found himself at that moment in Washington, he again answered, Hineni. This is our hope, and this is our faith that we go into the new year with. With this hope, with this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountains of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together. With this confidence, we know that we will rise to the occasion and overcome all the obstacles 5784 may present. No matter the challenge, no matter the difficulty, no matter how far away our dreams may feel, we will always be able to answer, Hineni. May this new year be the one in which we answer our calls for everything that comes to us, saying together, Hineni. Shana Tova.